And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Friday, January 17th, 2025. And we'll return our video more toward normal presentation. Yesterday we had a generator replacement for the building, so we had to kind of be creative and go through a more of a remote backup process. But things are back to normal now. Looking at what we have to contend with this weekend, we continue to have low pressure out here in the Bering, another impulse lifting northward here for the weekend. Frontal system pushing inland through the southwest interior, and that's going to be riding northeastward up along areas of the western Gulf up and through Cook Inlet as we go through the course of the weekend. Eventually, the frontal system will push further eastward, bringing some more precipitation to areas of the Panhandle. As far as IFR conditions, far northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, western areas of Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula down to Kodiak Island, Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. And then a lot of IFR conditions due to some areas of precipitation, mainly some snow and some blowing snow here out of Chukchi Sea, northern Bering, and maybe a little bit of a light mix, some rain trying to come in as warmer air is being pushed inland with temperatures rising above freezing here over areas of the southwest interior, especially the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim basins. By the time we get into Saturday afternoon, another impulse of low pressure coming northward, so we find IFR conditions prevailing Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, eastern Kenai, western Prince William Sound, still holding on northern Panhandle around Chilkoot and White above Haines and Skagway. Then back here, western portion of the Brooks Range, IFR conditions, upslope flow. There's snow falling here, gusty winds down through the Bering Strait, through St. Lawrence down to Nunavik Island. And then as we go into Sunday morning, we find there could be secondary low develop here, a weak one at that along the front, because the front's going to be arcing here through across the interior as it gradually makes progress to the north and east. And IFR conditions also back out here along the west coast. For Sunday afternoon, we find with that weak secondary low development, IFR conditions, there'll be an enhancement of rain, Cape Suckling to Yakutat Bay, and then the intercoastal mountains would be in the form of some heavier snow as you go up into elevation there. And then we find along the Alaska Range, IFR conditions because of the the east-southeast flow trying to turn more southerly once the front passes, and then back along all the west coast in through the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim basins here as we head through Sunday afternoon. So pass conditions on Saturday should generally start out for Anaktuvik Pass, IFR becoming MVFR. Same thing, Adigan Pass, lower ceilings, maybe a little precipitation. MVFR by afternoon. Further west, though, along the Brooks Range, it'll be IFR, especially as you get out toward the western half of the Brooks Range. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR will prevail on Saturday because of that moist upslope flow associated with along the frontal boundary pushing through. Rainy Pass, IFR. Windy Pass may stay MVFR on Saturday. Bit questionable, but it may just do that. Isabel starting IFR becoming MVFR, and then way toward the east, toward the Elkan border, Mentasta Pass, VFR, and as we drop down across the Copper River Basin, Tanita Pass should hold on to VFR conditions, though just south of there, MVFR conditions are likely on Saturday. And then for Portage Pass, the middle pass out through Prince William Sound, IFR conditions expected Saturday. MVFR will hold though along the west entrance. And finally, in the far north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will likely remain IFR for Saturday. So taking a quick look at what we have here in terms of freezing levels at the surface, the low pressure that's generally sitting out here in the Bering has pulled in warmer air, this front that's arced ahead of it, and then now extends down, approaching up through the Gulf. We find freezing levels bumping upward 2,000 and 4,000 feet across the southwest mainland and above 4,000 feet northern two-thirds of the Alaska Peninsula into Kodiak Island. That's about the extent of the warmer air aloft, and we have temperatures that'll be near above freezing and into the southwest interior as a result of this warmer air being drawn north and northeastward. So, of course, where there are any areas of precipitation within those clouds, where we have those the precipitation-bearing clouds. There's a potential for a batch of lighter snow showers or light snow to lift across the panhandle Saturday that could bring some moderate icing above 3,000 feet. More importantly, though, the precipitation along this front and associated with low pressure back here, as well as another one coming up from the south, we find that there could be moderate icing western Gulf back across Bristol Bay above 6,000 feet. And then up here, definitely winter weather still going on. Areas of accumulating snow and some blowing snow out over the northern Bering, south slopes of the Brooks Range, north along the middle Yukon and back toward the Seward Peninsula. We could find moderate icing above 3,000 and 4,000 feet there in the far west and northwest. Looking at the upper level wind field, 30,000 feet, 300 millibars. We have a ridge along the Alcan border down into the North Pacific through the eastern Gulf. Front side of it, 100, 110 knot jet core into British Columbia, northwesterly winds aloft. There's a jet core of 130 knots coming up out of the North Pacific toward the Gulf, and then a broad band of winds anywhere from 80 to 100 knots, especially up there, Seward Peninsula, into the northwest, Lisburn Peninsula area. So at 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, this is a strong wind field. Winds generally 50 to as high as 65, 70 knots across the western mainland and along the west coast, extending downward into the North Pacific, heading up toward the Gulf. More importantly, at 3,000 feet, that wind field very pronounced again, a strong wind field anywhere from 45 to locally as high as 60, 65 knots all across the western mainland, west coast, coming in across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, entrance of Cook Inlet. There's a concentration of stronger winds through that region. It's all associated with that frontal system. It's not quite as strong as the wind field this past weekend that brought the windstorm to Anchorage, but respectable winds. So there are going to be gustier winds as that system works its way east and northeastward. Greatest threat for severe turbulence on Saturday will be from areas of lower Cook Inlet, the entrance there north of Kodiak Island, across Kamishak Bay, Lake Iliamna, and then curving up across the southwest interior, lower middle Yukon, east side of Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, up to the southward facing slopes of the western Brooks Range. There could be severe turbulence, surface to 6,000 feet there out toward Cook Entrance, and then 4,000 feet for the mainland interior. Now for areas of the Alaska Range, surface 10,000 feet along the ridge lines through the gaps, there could be also some moderate turbulence there. A broad area of moderate turbulence covers much of the western half of the mainland, the west coast, extending down across the western Gulf, Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, trailing out to the far eastern Aleutians, where there could be moderate turbulence on Saturday, surface to 3,000 feet.